Rock stars seeing ghosts? Heck yeah. So those of you that grew up in the 80s like me, of course, what was the one of the bands we remember from our youth or spending the summertime listening to, blasting with the windows down? Van Halen, right? I used to listen to Van Halen all the time. Well, we're going to get into this real life Van Halen ghost story. This is kind of cool. Hey, if you're new to my channel, hi, I'm Dr. Andrea O'Connor. We talk about interesting things, supernatural, medical, whatever's going on. And then you can see me on my lives on my other channel, Doc in the Den on YouTube. But you have to click live to see the lives. They don't just pop up on the main screen, just so you know. Okay, so let's get into this Van Halen ghost story. So this happened when, because we're going to talk about Sammy Hagar. Remember, he took over for David Lee Roth. And this is really pertaining to the lead singer, Sammy Hagar, and two of his supernatural experiences that are really kind of wild. So the first one, this happened during Sammy's wilder years. So likely the late 70s or early 80s. And even though he didn't join Van Halen until 1985, which that's still wild too. I remember 1985 listening to David Lee Roth, but maybe I was just listening to songs that were already out. So, but Sammy Hagar was already famous in his own right. Remember, he came out with that song, I Can't Drive 55. How many of us sung that at the top of our lungs in our youth while driving, right? So he was living in a house, possibly in California, though he hasn't pinned down the exact spot in every telling of this ghost story. Given his Bay Area roots and later Malibu haunts, it's a safe bet this was somewhere along the West Coast in California. So Sammy has told this ghost story quite a few times, most notably in a casual 1990 interview with Guitar World and later in a radio spot on the Howard Stern show. So he woke up in the middle of the night and it was pitch black and dead quiet, feeling like, just something was off. Have you ever done that? Woken up and you're like, okay, what just woke me up? Something is off. So he woke up and at the foot of his bed, he said, stood an old woman. And she wasn't yelling, screaming. She was just staring at him, which in a way, it's just so much more creepy, right? So she wasn't moving. She wasn't speaking. She was just there. So Sammy described her as very pale, just this pale old woman standing there at the end of his bed, kind of wispy, like she wasn't completely solid. And, there was no glowing eyes or horror movie vibes, nothing like that, just an eerie stillness. He wasn't trashed or high. He said that. He was completely sober. He swears that he was stone cold sober, which made it hit even harder. He didn't scream or bolt out of the room. Instead, he said he locked eyes with her and his heart was pounding and he was trying to figure out, like, am I awake? Am I dreaming? Like, when you come out of a dream and it's really scary and you're kind of still seeing it and your heart's pounding, right? But he was just kind of amazed. And he said it felt like forever, even though it was just seconds where he was locking eyes with her. And then he said she just slowly faded away into nothing. So Sammy said he was just laying there in his bed after she faded away, just laying there wide awake, his eyes wide, wondering what the heck just happened. So the next morning, he checked all over the room. No signs of anything. There was no weird smells, no cold spots like you see in the movies, right? But that feeling of eeriness stuck with him. Unlike a dream, when you wake up, you're like, well, that was a weird dream last night. But when you experience something in the middle of the night, how like it stays with you the next day and you're like, okay, something happened last night. What the heck? So his take of what happened, he is a spiritual guy. And he says he's not easily spooked by the rock star life's chaos. He later speculated she might have been tied to the house he was living in. And maybe he was a former owner, that she was maybe a former owner or someone that had died there in the area or in the house or, somewhere nearby in the past. He said on Howard Stern he didn't feel threatened at all. And it was more like he was saying that she wanted him to see her. and like that she had a message for him that he just couldn't crack at the time. So he never dug into the property's history, though he was too busy touring at that time and kind of living the rock star dream. So it just kind of went on the back shelf. And so it's just kind of a mystery. Was she a lost soul? Is she trying to warn him? Was it his mind playing tricks on him? I don't think that. I think that it was probably, maybe it was a long lost relative that died before that he was not aware of or didn't know, or someone that was actually tied to that house. It's pretty cool. So, okay, this next story is even wilder. So this one goes back when Sammy Hagar was a teen. So this had to be around 1967, 1968. He was a teenager. And of course, this was before he was famous. And he was living in Fontana, California. And this is a working town, like a working class town east of LA. Of course, he hadn't hit the big time yet. And so it's pre-Van Halen, pre-solo career, just, a big kid with stars in his eyes and dreams of being like a rock star someday, right? He definitely had a rebellious streak at the time. And he first spilled this full story in 2011 in the memoir, Red, My Uncensored Life in Rock. And he doubled down on this story in interviews that he had in Rolling Stone and MTV. So here we go. Late at night, Sammy Hagar was outside. Here he is, a teenager, just, restless, maybe walking around, sneaking around, who knows. And he said he looked up in the sky and saw something weird. It wasn't a plane, it wasn't a star, but it was a glowing object hovering over a hill near his house there in California. And he described it as just this classic saucer shape, lights pulsing, silent as all get out. He said silent as hell. But most people would have bolted at that time in the 60s, right? But Sammy, curious as ever, he just kept watching this thing in the sky. And that's when it got freaky. He said he felt a jolt. Something come over him. He said it felt like his brain was being zapped. In his words, he said, it was like they plugged into me, and all of a sudden there was numbers and codes and stuff he couldn't understand download straight into his head. He didn't black out, he didn't get beamed up, but he froze, stuck in this telepathic link. He said he saw figures inside the craft, and they were shadowy and not human looking at all. And he said it was like he was looking through a psychic window into this flying saucer. There was no little green men waving, and he just had a sense of them observing him. Then, as quick as it started, the ship shot off right into the sky, gone in a blink. Sammy was left staring off to where it just flew off, and his mind was buzzing. It was just racing with fragments he couldn't piece together. So Sammy's dead serious about this experience that happened to him. He said in an MTV interview, "I'm not nuts. This actually happened. They were checking me out, maybe planting something in me for later." So he ties it to his creative spark that he had later in life, half joking that his songwriting ability and creativity might have come from that download. He speculated that they were extraterrestrials, not ghosts, not demons, but advanced beings who picked him for some reason. So no tinfoil hat needed here, right? He's just very matter of fact about it. And for years, he kept quiet about this story, figuring people would just laugh at him or just blow him off. But post Van Halen fame, this gave him the confidence to own the story and start talking about it. So what I find interesting about this story, and I have another video about this, I forgot what I titled it. It's from last summer. And I was talking about how it was early in the morning and I had turned over in bed and boom, all of a sudden I'm seeing codes, and viewers have told me how I described it because they were scrolling past like on tablets in my mind. It was bizarre. And but viewers of my channel have said these sound like runes. And I thought, that's so weird because how he explains it was like this instant download. Now, I myself never saw a craft. I was in bed in my own bedroom. I simply turned over in bed and boom, it was like my mind's eye saw all these things. And I have a whole video about it. But that's what kind of stuck out to me when I was listening to Sammy Hagar's story, again from Van Halen, because I used to listen to Van Halen all the time. And I never knew he had these supernatural experiences. It's just so wild. So what do you guys think of that? Do you remember Van Halen? Do you remember Sammy Hagar? Do you remember just hanging out to his music and to Van Halen's music? And what do you think about this story? Isn't it interesting? I've heard that he's a really, really nice guy, super creative, and thank God he was there so Van Halen didn't just die away when David Lee Roth left, right? I don't know. Love to know your take and your opinion on this. Thanks for being here, and I'll see you on the next one.